About. I'm here to work for you, and I look forward to hearing from you today about your thoughts and your ideas and your questions about what's going on in Washington or what issues closer to home. So I'm excited to be here. I'll just start. Usually, I'll just say a few words for a few minutes, and then we'll open it up because it's really your meeting. But I want to thank you for joining us. I'm excited to be here. As you know, I've been representing this district for about 9 years, and before that, I was in business. Started several internet and technology companies. And started a couple schools to serve at-risk youth, new immigrants and homeless youth in the Denver area. And I bring that experience, and so I work a lot of education issues and technology and business issues because that's my own background. But of course, we're called upon to vote on issues on every single topic. And it's actually a good way to think about Congress. Congress, there's a few career politicians, but mostly they're lay people who've done something else in life, and so they have some knowledge of something. So there's people that have been career military, and they're going to know a lot about the military. There's people that have been nurses and doctors. There's an overabundance of attorneys, for sure, 40% in Congress, but that's okay, because they specialize in interpreting the law, so it's makes reasonable that they want to help write the law. But even among attorneys, there's different kinds of attorneys. I mean, they might be a bankruptcy attorney and they know a lot about that, or they might be a civil litigation attorney. So, we all try to prevail upon one another for the experiences we have. So in areas of education, where I've run a school, I've served on State Board of Education for 6 years, a lot of my colleagues will turn to me on areas of business and technology, where I also have a lot of experience. I try to provide ideas and knowledge where I can to my colleagues on both sides of the aisle in those areas. But of course, we're called upon to vote on areas in every single area. I want to also highlight the major bill of last Congress that I was to help work on and get done was to replace No Child Left Behind with the Every Student Succeeds Act. So we actually finally replaced that kind of Bush-era law with a better law for our public schools that had overwhelming support on both sides of the aisle. It passed almost unanimously. Certainly, not a bill I would have written if I could write my own, but that's what a legislative body is. It's about compromise. So the fact that almost every member of Congress agreed it was better than what it replaced was good. I helped write a number of components of it, including a language encouraging allowing federal funds for dual and concurrent enrollment so kids can get college credits while they're in high school, and applying those funds, improving the efficacy of the teacher training funds, and a number of other elements that I helped construct in that bill. In this Congress, I passed 3 bills from the House already. 2 of them were public lands bills. In the district I'm honored to represent, the 2nd Congressional District, Northern and Northwestern Colorado, about 65% of the district is public land. And so here, of course, Rocky Mountain National Park and Grand County and Eagle County and Summit County. And the stakes are very high on public lands in general, because as we talk about some of the damaging news and kind of removing environmental protections, removing methane laws, these things are bad enough, but frankly, the most permanent harm would be done if our public lands are sold off or developed, because there's no going back. That's permanent. I mean, you talk about something like an emission rule, that can always change. There can always be a different, president, different Congress. They can clean up our air. But once public lands are sold off or developed, it's over, right? And so here in Colorado, we talk about them not only as, of course, part of our Western heritage, part of our quality of life, you hunt, you fish, but also, and hike, but also big economic drivers. I mean, you look at a town like Estes Park, or you look at a town like in Eagle County or Grand County, most of the economy and jobs revolve around the public lands. And so it's incredibly important recreation and tourism industry to Colorado, and our public lands across western Colorado, which is where most of our public lands are. They're not in eastern Colorado. They're almost all west of here in the mountains, in the federal land. So they're incredibly important economic drivers. So I passed one bill called the Wedge Act that expanded the boundaries of Rocky Mountain National Park to include several inholdings. I think 5 inholdings that will be incorporated in the park. It's called the Wedge. It's on the Grand County side, not the Larimer County side. And then I passed a bill called the Bolt Stitch Access Act, which is for the town of Minturn in Eagle County. Has to do with their water supply. And then one called the Email Privacy Act, which would require the federal government to get search warrants before searching private emails of yours that are more than 6 months old. There's a loophole in them in current law. Currently, most of your communications are protected. They would need to have a warrant with probable cause to search your old voicemails or your answering machine or your personal correspondence. But because the law was written before email was prevalent, it was left out. And so actually there's no warrant needed now to search any civilian agency of government can actually search your old emails without any process. So we're trying to create a warrant process for that. So I'm sure there's other bigger things on your mind than those bills that I was able to pass, some of the big things going on. September and October, there's going to be a lot of news coming out of Washington. There's some very big things happening. Probably the main legislative month for the entire 2 years will be September and October. It's because we're facing a government shutdown if we don't fund government. The funding for the current, all the federal government does, expires September 30th. So there has to be a funding bill for the next full year or partial, but I hope it's better to do the full year because otherwise we'll just be back there in a few months. By September 30th, also increasing the debt ceiling. That's money that's already been spent, it's just the authority to borrow. In my mind, that really shouldn't be even controversial. It's like if you spend money on your credit card and then you get the bill and you're like, I don't want to pay it. Well, tough luck, you spent the money. So once the government spent the money, of course we should increase the debt because we already spent it. If you don't want to spend it, then don't spend it. But so there's that, and then there's two other ones that are important for Colorado: the Federal Aviation Administration (FAA) reauthorization that also expires September 30th, and then flood insurance, also very important, that expires September 30th too. So a lot of these will probably be put together into one bill. There'll probably be one enormous bill, and it might be after September 30th because what's happened in the past, Congress, as you probably noticed, is not good at making deadlines. So they could, if they fail to do it by September 30th, they'll do like a 2-week extension, a 1-week extension, a 3-week extension, and probably address it sometime in October. But you're going to be hearing a lot about this because this is going to be the main kind of legislative vehicle. It's the vehicle that President Trump wants the border wall funding in. It's a vehicle that some of us are talking about whether we can put deferred action or DACA. If it's not in rule, can we put that in law in there? Because bills are hard to pass. Maybe there'll be infrastructure. Maybe infrastructure will be part of the discussion. So it's hard to say, but because it's a must-pass bill, this government shuts down if it doesn't pass. It's a real important legislative vehicle that'll be in the end of September, early October timeframe, and you'll be hearing a lot about that in the coming weeks. So with that in mind, I'm here to represent you. I'd love to hear what's on your minds. Our staff will take the microphone around. And just all we ask, we'll get to everybody. We'll probably get to you twice if you have 2 comments. We just ask that everybody keep it to about a minute and a half. They can be questions, comments, anything. One more point. We're here as your federal ombudsman to help on any federal issue. So my staff, Mara and others, out of our Fort Collins office, our Frisco office, our Boulder office, any issue you have with veterans benefits, with Social Security, with Medicare, with Medicaid, immigration, anything federal, call on our office. We will help intervene with the appropriate federal agency. We're very effective in getting items dealt with quicker, in cutting through the red tape. Obviously, your claim or whatever it is will be decided on its merits. We can't guarantee that whatever you're seeking will be positive, but we can help get it dealt with much quicker if you work with your member of Congress. So we're happy to work with you on any federal agency, and we'll give it over to Mark for questions, and just raise your hand and we'll take it around.
Thanks.
Thank you. My name is Jim Doughty. Thank you for being here.
Sure.
We see Speaker Ryan on television from time to time, and he talks about 3 or 4 things that he and I guess the Congress care about. But from him, what do you hear in terms of his priorities in pushing legislation in the September-October timeframe, other than the debt limit? That pretty much has to be done,
And spending.
or things don't work at all.
So I would say, I don't know if this is on. Speaker Ryan is passionate about tax reform. That would be his personal passion. Before being speaker, he was chair of the Ways and Means Committee, which is the tax writing committee. He is fundamentally kind of a guy that cares about economic growth and tax reform. That's just what he cares about. He doesn't like walls on borders. He doesn't like he doesn't get involved with social issues too much. Now so that's what he wants, but he's not alone in the world. There's also the Senate and the President. There's been very little kind of the tax reform one it's a simple concept. The concept is we get rid of loopholes and deductions and bring down rates for individuals and for C corps, for businesses. It was last done in the early 80s. Reagan was president, Democratic Congress. They some of you, I only remember about it from history because I was only like 10, but some of you remember Reagan would have like it said the tax code was this high, and then they got it to like this high. I don't know if you remember that visual, but it's true. And so what's happened is over the intervening 30 years, it's got reaccumulated all of these loopholes. And so many of them special interests and lobbyists wanted this, wanted that. And so the concept is, can we get rid of a lot of those tax preferences and bring down rates? Now, it's a little bit harder in practice politically, because on the individual side, the three biggest ones are all very popular in their own right, because they're charitable contributions, home mortgage interest, and state and local tax deductibility. So you almost have to do something in that realm, maybe cap them overall, or reduce home mortgage interest, or do something in that world if you want to substantially bring down rates. I mean, if you want to bring them down 1 or 2%, you could probably do it with the minor deductions, but you have to be willing to. Then he wasn't so much willing to do that, but what he proposed is a whole separate tax called a border adjustment tax, which is effectively like a 20% tariff on imported products, using that to bring down rates. But it's very problematic from my perspective for a number of reasons. One is, because it's a kind of a tariff, other countries would likely reciprocate. It would hurt American jobs. It sounds good in isolation, but then all of a sudden they slap it down on ours. And two, it's still a tax. Like everything we wear, most of it's made overseas. I mean, we'd be paying 20% more for all this stuff. So I think he's starting to pivot off of that. That's where he is. Also, he wants to be fiscally responsible and make sure that this is not something that increases the deficit. President Trump doesn't seem to care about the deficit. So he is proposing one that would just balloon the deficit. It's tax cuts that are, not paid for at all, along with spending increases on the military side. So that's not going to happen, but that's kind of where he is. He's a guy that likes debt. That's how he built his business empire. He loves debt. So I mean, there's some people who say debt's great, we should build things. I'm not one of them, but I mean that's his perspective. So it's very different than Paul Ryan's. Mitch McConnell hasn't been as active in that debate, but I mean, I think again, if there's a way to deliver, even if it's modest, even if it's not the whole caboodle, if we get rid of some loopholes and deductions and bring down rates, that would be a good success. So that's what Speaker Ryan wants to do. Infrastructure is something that President Trump wants to do, but not so much Speaker Ryan or Mitch McConnell. I think the Democrats have been more interested in infrastructure in general. It's because infrastructure takes money, right? And it also takes away paying for it. And traditionally that's been the gas tax. It may be something else, but again, unless you go deeper into debt, which in the House, it's bad enough, and most Democrats and Republicans don't want to go even more in debt, you're probably going to need to pay for infrastructure, or at least most of it, which probably, again, means something like a gas tax or something else you agree on. And on that issue, again, if it's going to happen, the pathway would be Democrats and some Republicans, with President Trump. But part of the problem is President Trump doesn't have much political capital because he's really created a circus-like atmosphere in the White House, which I'm sure you've all been very entertained by, but it's not very productive to running the country or passing laws. He is constantly distracting from the really big things that matter, like infrastructure and tax reform, to do all sorts of, some of them bad, some of them just amusing, but certainly irrelevant things, right? Certainly irrelevant things. And I don't know if he can help himself, frankly. I mean, I don't know. I hope he can, but it's not like it's other people telling him to do that stuff. That's just him. I mean, his staff would love if he didn't, frankly, but he has to find a way to control himself better. I mean, even the management, the way he undermines his own subordinates. And I mean, I come out of the business sector. I mean, this is the worst management. And those of you, I mean, he's like literally attacks the people that work for him, on publicly, and they don't know where they stand with him. And it's just a very bizarre way of running things. So we'll see what happens with that. So honestly, I'm not terribly optimistic about tax reform or infrastructure. Tax reform would be great. The other piece of tax reform that we'd love to see happen, which might be easier, if we can't do the individual side, we might be able to do the corporate side. Corporations in our country, C Corps, pay one of the highest tax rates in the world, 35%. That's one of the reasons you see these inversions and offshoring, because they're going to countries that are 20% or 15%. And it's not an area where we need to be the low price leader. There's countries that are desperate for companies and they'll do it, at 0%. That's not us. There's lots of reasons you want to be here, but we have to be competitive. So we can bring that down. President Obama proposed bringing 35% down to 25 to 28%. If we can get it down lower, even 20, 25%, somewhere in that range, I think it would have a demonstrable effect on companies wanting to stay here rather than leave. and reinvesting their profits in our country rather than expanding overseas. So that might be a piece of tax reform that we can sort of do as a unit. So that's what Paul Ryan also would love to do, I think, and it would be bipartisan. There'll be individual companies, many companies will benefit, but there'll be some companies that will oppose it because they'll say currently we take advantage of all these loopholes and expenditures, and some of it they pay a very low rate. But certainly small and mid-sized companies would benefit because they're very rarely are able to take advantage of the same things as some of the big companies. So those are some of the things that we're working on there. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Go ahead next. And where's our microphone? There we are.
Hi, I'm Linda Irwin, and my question is in regards to President Trump, and why aren't people...
I haven't seen an impeachable offense yet. I mean, being erratic and all the things he is, not impeachable. There is an investigation going on, and I think whether you like the president or don't, we should wait for the outcome of that investigation because it could or may or may not result in an impeachable offense. But there's currently an FBI investigation by the independent counsel, and I have faith in that process, right? And I think that they. What's that?
There could be a world war starting.
Well, but I mean, again, if there's an impeachable offense, I think the criminal investigation will get to the bottom of that, whether there was illegal collusion with a foreign power, whether there was anything illegal that occurred that involved him, or perhaps involved his associates and not him. I mean, I'll keep an open mind, but law enforcement professionals, a thorough investigation, I think they'll get to the bottom of it. But Congress can absolutely assert itself. We're in Article 1, Section 1 of the Constitution. The president can't do anything that isn't really funded by Congress. And so there's already been two important ways that Congress has reclaimed authority from the president. One is Congress passed a bill overwhelmingly to remove the authority of the president to get rid of the Russian sanctions. Because Democrats and Republicans in Congress said, you know what, we don't know for sure, but there's enough smoke there where we just frankly don't trust this guy to be the only person who gets to remove those sanctions. He may owe them money, he may borrow money from Russia, they may fund his projects, maybe he colluded with them. That's not beyond a reasonable doubt that we would need for impeachment, but it's in removing the sanctions, it's saying let's just make sure that he goes to Congress on that. And so that was passed overwhelmingly. It was like 415-3. He signed it because had he vetoed it, it would have been overridden. So we actually removed that authority. Secondly, the Senate chose to remain in pro forma session over summer, meaning they denied the president the ability to make recess appointments. And this is very unusual because, of course, a Republican Senate did that to President Obama, but that's because they were of opposite parties. As far as I know, it's never been done between a Senate of the same party and a president, where the Republican senators, of course joined by the Democratic senators, said we don't necessarily trust who you're going to appoint while we're out of town. So we're going to, pro forma session means they quickly gavel in and gavel out every day for 2 minutes, and they actually have to have 2 senators physically there to do it. And so they're saying we want to make sure we get to approve the appointees that you make. And so they took that authority back. There's many other things Congress can do, obviously, particularly if more than 2/3 of Congress agrees on something, like they did on removing the authority of the president on the Russian sanctions. So when you have Congress more united, they are, in many ways, the first among equals of the 3 branches of government, because the president, of course, can administer and execute the law, but he can't make the law, and he can't spend money that isn't appropriated by Congress. And as you know, there's rural and there's rural, right? And many folks in Wellington will say we're rural, and then folks in Central County will say no, you're not. You're Front Range, and we experience that in different parts of the state. But certainly rural broadband and connectivity is a big part of it. We have areas of our state where not only is there the inability of people to get high-speed internet access, which means they lose out on telecommuting opportunities, businesses lose out on the opportunity to kind of be able to be part of a lot of the growth and growing jobs of the 21st century. So I've been very supportive of efforts at expanding broadband across our entire state. And that's going to be, and then of course the physical infrastructure piece too. When we're talking about physical infrastructure, we're not just talking about Highway 25. We're of course talking about 34, but we're talking about, frankly, all of the roads and bridges that connect our rural communities, including initiatives to pave and other things that really have a profound impact on moving goods and people between different areas. So when we talk about our country succeeding, when we talk about Colorado succeeding, we really need to talk about the whole country, the whole state. How do we make sure that it works for Denver, and it works for Fort Collins and Wellington, but also Julesburg and also Rio Blanco County. So that's important to keep in mind, and certainly making sure that every area of our state can be part of the future, which is not exclusively, but a part of it is a lot of the growth in the information technology jobs is going to be a big part of our public policy challenges we face. Yeah, I actually do have some, I have my own, personal feelings on the matter. I've been very supportive of communities having a say in that planning process around extraction. And it's not that they have no say today, it's all kind of a matter of degrees, but I think for municipalities and counties, it's really important how they plan their future, right? And I think that areas they want to integrate extraction, there might be other areas where they say we want to have a subdevelopment here. And if we have this drilling profile, then we won't be able to add in a subdevelopment there. So I think the community should have a seat at the table in those decisions, as well as, of course, the surface owners should have a seat at the table too, in terms of decisions that affect their own property. Yeah, great question, and obviously you're right. Obviously it's there's Republicans, Democrats, Independents. I think President Trump has harmed his own ability to implement his agenda by the sideshows. Is the point I was trying to make. I think it's just he's not out there talking about his agenda. He's out there, doing stuff that is very different. It's just sort of distracting from it. So usually the president tries to sell their agenda, and they try to make the case for it, and they do that to the American people. They do that to Congress. He seems to be talking about. It's unclear for me, frankly, what the agenda is. He's out there talking about everything else, but these little things here and there. So I'll look forward to meeting with you. The Farm Bill will be something else that Congress is working on. I think it'll be after this sort of must-pass cliff. It'll be kind of the next thing that we work on. It's traditionally been bipartisan. I have a number of areas that we've been prioritizing in it, mostly around making sure that small farmers and family farmers, get a fair shake and good treatment. And while we all respect the contributions of sort of the large scale and corporate agribusiness, they've co-opted a lot of the bill, and so we've got to find a way to kind of make sure that the beneficiaries are family farmers. So we'll get into it, the details with you on that, and we'll have a number of amendments. Again, one of the efforts I've been doing is to try to restructure the subsidy process so it's focused on smaller farmers rather than the big farmers. But yeah, there's a lot of issues in that are pending. A lot of businesses in our district, in addition to ag, that have a major interest in that. Whether it's the breweries, whether it's the organic product food companies, grocers. Everybody. That's a bill that's important to a lot of people. Of course, farmers among them, but it's a bill that, and I think I voted both for and against them in the past. It all depends on what the bill is. But we'll be happy to meet with you about the particular issues that affect Larimer and Weld County. So I'm not an attorney, but I believe, and it may very well be challenged, but I believe the answer is yes. They were done by executive order, not by law. So when we establish something like wilderness, and I have, for instance, a wilderness bill to establish over 50,000 acres of wilderness in Eagle and Summit County, once that's done, and we have existing wilderness today, once it's in law, a president can't just say, I'm shrinking the wilderness. But when you have some of these monuments and parks that have been done by the executive order, yes, it's my understanding that they could be shrunk by an executive order. So we hope that doesn't happen. When they're shrunk, those lands would still be public. The president can't really sell off lands without congressional approval. But the level of protection for those public lands would not be the same. They could then be whatever the other use is. It could be grazing, or it could be development, or oil and gas. They're no longer protected the same way that a national monument would be. But yes, the president can do that if they were done by executive order. Go ahead.
Is there something we can do to stop that?
Well, I think Secretary Zinke would be the key person to contact. He had been a colleague of mine in the House from Montana. It will be obviously the president's decision, but his as well. We would have a recourse in Congress in the sense that if he were to do that, we could then introduce bills, which hopefully would be bipartisan bills, that could reestablish in law the previous boundaries of the national monuments and parks. So that would be our recourse, and I would be happy to look at doing that. I mean, I would strongly support doing that. Of course, number one, we want to prevent him from doing that, but no, that's their decision. But obviously, letters to Secretary Zinke or others that involve the decision-making process would be how to do that. If they shrink them, then we would look at introducing in statute laws that would expand it to its previous boundary. But we would have to pass those, and then, of course, if the president didn't favor them, which he wouldn't because he's the one who shrunk them, we would need 2/3 of Congress. So it's not necessarily realistic they would become law right away, but at least they get in the system there. And then maybe if there's a future president or future Congresses, they could eventually become law. And then it's better to do them in law, frankly, because then it's not up to a president on what side of the bed they wake up on, and you have that permanent protection. That's why wilderness is so important. That's protected for, for hiking and fishing and hunting and wildlife. And no president can remove that. It would require a change in the law, which again is very cumbersome. So hopefully this will be after the sort of must-do items that Congress needs to do, and hopefully November, December, I hope we get to bipartisan work to improve the Affordable Care Act. I think with the failure of the effort to repeal it and replace it with something that was worse by almost any account, it was just poorly thought out, and they kept changing the details and substituting stuff in, and nobody had time to read it. So now that that's kind of ended, hopefully it's ended. I mean, we'll see. That could be back too. I don't know. But I'm part of a group actually called No Labels Problem Solvers. It's 20 Democrats and 20 Republicans, where we do meet weekly. Mike Coffin from Colorado's in it too, and we put together some ideas for improving the Affordable Care Act that at least 3/4 of our bipartisan group support. So it hasn't been taken up yet by Republican or Democratic leadership, but I think that there is certainly a lot of common ground where we could say, rather than throw everything out, let's make sure we keep important parts of making sure people with pre-existing conditions can get health care, making sure that if we're going to have the subsidies and the exchanges so middle-class families can afford it, and make sure they're funded. So I think, hopefully, again, the optimistic side of me would say now we can roll up our sleeves and begin that bipartisan work. But again, any of that work will rely on the prerogative of those who control Congress, namely the Republicans. So it would take Paul Ryan, Mitch McConnell, others to say, yes, we bless this bipartisan work, and then let the rank and file Republicans and Democrats come up with some improvements. It can't happen without them, in the sense we can certainly talk about it without them, we are, but it won't actually be scheduled for a vote, because both chambers are controlled by their leaders in terms of what we actually get to vote on. The second one is easy, which is good. There's very good transparency. We have to disclose all of our all the assets we have. So other than that, of course, I'm in some mutual funds and these broad-based stock funds. I don't have any particular investments in pharmaceutical companies, but like anybody here, if I'm in a mutual fund, they probably have some. The first one I support, Medicare for all, and that's a basic level of coverage for everybody. I sponsored a bill to do that, so. And that would certainly allow and encourage just as many Medicare recipients today have supplemental insurance. Companies could still say we're doing an extra package of benefits on top of that, and people can buy it. But at least you'd have that baseline for everybody. And I mean, you having been in insurance, understand this. Insurance can add the most value when you have the biggest possible pool. And so why not have the pool of everybody? It's much better than everybody trying to game the system. We want healthy people. Everybody wants to cover healthy people. And so that's fundamentally kind of the inefficiency in the current system, is everybody tries to game the system so that they wind up covering the healthy ones and the sick people are stuck somewhere else. So we can have the most efficient insurance with the largest pool. So I do support that. And again, I think there's a healthy market for private insurance on top of that. Sure, good questions. I do support for rail safety having the two-person bill. I don't remember if it was a bill or a rule that I supported, but I support it, whatever form that takes.
Is that, sorry sir, just
yeah.
to include the acts that have been put forward specifically state a certified engineer and a certified conductor?
I'm pretty sure that's the bill. I mean, well, let's follow up. I remember it's two people as opposed to one. And I think it was the professional descriptions that you described. It did come up. On what we can do, let's get your information, because I have on occasions when there's been these disputes, like for instance, there's one now with the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers in Excel. So I was part of a letter trying to help them get their contract from Excel. So if there's an effort underway, and I can check with your union, I'd be happy to help them in kind of pressuring a contract. So we'll get your information on that too. And then what was the middle one? There's one other.
Just about the Cadillac tax.
Oh yeah, Cadillac tax. So I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think it'll ever hit. It's an accounting trick. It's actually one of the many accounting tricks that means that our deficit is actually worse than even the bad enough numbers that they tell everybody it is. Because what they're assuming in our 10-year budget projections that the government will get the money from the Cadillac tax. And I don't remember which year it starts, maybe year 2 or 3. It starts pretty soon. But every time it actually comes up, they say we're not really doing the Cadillac tax. We're deferring it a year, or we're deferring it 2 years. That's because nobody actually, I mean, maybe there's somebody who wants it to occur, but mostly, by and large, Congress doesn't actually want this tax to occur. I expect they will keep pushing it back a year at a time to disguise the overall size of the real deficit, is basically what they're doing. So it's possible that, again, if Congress just sort of collapsed and didn't do any of these bills, maybe it would take effect. But I mean, it seems very popular on both sides of the aisle. There's nobody, I can't think of a single member of Congress. I mean, Democrats and Republicans basically agree this tax shouldn't hit. So, but it's still on the books.
Right.
And they're just undoing it every year. 1 year deferral. So it's never going to hit, I don't think. But the reason, if Congress were to do a law to repeal it, then the deficit would look more realistic, which would be larger than over 10 years. So it's an accounting trick, unfortunately. And you're right, it creates uncertainty for you and your fellow workers, because you don't know for sure that Congress will keep delaying it. And it's just, it's very unfortunate. There's a lot of those other things that actually, it really, frankly, again, it disguises the debt and the deficit are even worse than advertised because of things like the Cadillac tax and the ongoing deferral. So we'll take your information. We'll see if we'll talk to your union and see if there's anything they think would be productive for us to help. If we can get your information, that'd be great.
And if there's...
Yeah. Place Fairness Act, you might have heard of that concept. Basically, there's a lot of people not paying their taxes today because they're supposed to pay the use tax when they bring something in. But businesses often pay it, but individuals really don't pay the use tax. What we would do is effectively create, as you said, a way of evening out these things through the Marketplace Fairness Act. There's strong support from retailers, of course. Even some of the online retailers now support it because they know it's where it's going. I can't remember whether it was Amazon or eBay. Those are the big two, but one of those two supports this effort now, and the other's kind of slightly opposed. I can't remember which is which. But it just makes sense because when we talk about things you order online, they use our roads, they use our locally funded infrastructure, and they're effectively not paying for it. I mean, when the truck is going on to deliver at your home, it's using it the same way as anybody else does, but because of this quirk in the law, even though the purchaser is supposed to pay the use tax, that doesn't happen. And so we look at it as collecting taxes that are already due in some ways. I mean, this is a use tax, let's just find a better mechanism that actually collects it. It is bipartisan. That's the good news. The bad news is it hasn't happened yet. We've been talking about it for years, and it's, like a lot of things, somewhat bottlenecked. And I think it's bottlenecked because Democrats generally support it.